What does it really mean to strengthen ECD for lasting impact? She's already given us some insights that we need to be grappling with, looking at education and ECD as an economic strategy and not just a moral imperative, making sure that we're showing up, especially those who have the capacity to show up as sponsors and donors, but more as a strategic partner, focusing on the workforce and how we professionalize that workforce, and of course, not forgetting issues of infrastructure and curricula as well. And so, ladies and gentlemen, in partnership with the FirstRand Foundation, it's my pleasure to introduce for our first executive overview for this conversation, the CEO of FNB, Harry Kellen, who's also graciously sent us a video to focus and center us in this conversation, after which we will then transition into a broader conversation in the form of a panel discussion. Again, I invite you to claim your share of voice by using the Q&A, the green button at the bottom of the conference virtual app, to send us questions and to send us comments, and let's engage together. But for now, won't you please turn your attention once again to the screen as we listen to Harry Kellen, the CEO of FNB.
ECDs. FNB is part of FirstRand. FirstRand has about 3 foundations, and those 3 foundations are involved in many, many activities. ECD is just but one of them. We do gender-based violence, we do normal education processes, we actually do in terms of relief. So there's a whole lot of activity that's done to that. But I think today's topic of interest is ECDs. And I mean, why is education so important? And everybody talks about it. Training the teachers is actually fundamental, because they actually are the ones that spend more time with the kids than sometimes parents do. Now, we have adopted, actually given funding and support to over 4,000 ECDs. And we say we, that's through FirstRand Foundation, but including FNB staffers over the last 20 years, impacting over 200,000 children. They had 200,000 lives by training over 17,000 teachers and training them in terms of also using technology, digital technology, etc. Now we know to effectively break through this cycle of poverty, education is the fundamental thing, and we've seen it, and you can have case by case and examples of that. So by focusing on education, we know it makes an impact to people's lives. Now, FNB, we talk about grassroots to greatness. You heard it many times when we talk about effectively the Springboks and our sponsorship of rugby, but it's no different when you come to education. So the grassroots to greatness, yes, of course we focus on the graduates. Yes, we focus in terms of universities. We hire graduates, we hire people in what we call as a program as first jobbers. That means your first job, we allow you an opportunity to get trained on site, either with the bank or with partners that we have selected to be able to give you that training. I mean, roughly that, I think in the last year, it's over 900 million rand is what we invested back into first jobbers. But that's the end part of it. The middle part is bursaries, for sure. Do we give bursaries for primary? Yes. Mainly to FirstRand staffers, secondary school, but definitely also tertiary. But the grassroots is what matters. It's the ECD. And as I said, that's 200,000 lives impacted, with over 100 million rand funded in the last 4 to 5 years by the foundations. Now, that is what, as I said, is close to my heart. Teachers giving digital literacy. But you know, when you walk into these centers and you can see the challenges they face, it's not just about actually money. Sometimes it's physical resources, actually the center itself, let alone actually creating equipment within that. So we provide, let alone the training, we provide where required equipment. We provide sometimes the basic needs, be it in the kitchen, etc. It's holistically. Now, clearly, the team at FirstRand Foundation do a great job in terms of weaning out lots of requests they get. I mean, there's a lot of ECDs out there. Government is doing a great job in trying to, you know, people will say regulate is not regulate, it's actually to normalize and making sure that they are appropriately licensed, etc. Because you can understand that there's also people that sometimes just use this, do ECDs for the sake of earning a keep or money. but actually those that are really passionate are the ones that do it far beyond just that. A lot of people ask as to how do people get involved. I mean, the FirstRand Foundation has a team that actually do a great amount of job. Yes, they do a lot of time in terms of weeding out and due diligence, etc. But please get in touch with them. You know, this is one of the things that actually, this is not a competitive advantage space. You know, the more corporates do this, I think the more impact we can do. We will for sure. We partner with other organizations, we partner with NGOs. You know, we're happy to partner with other corporates to be able to, and share. To be honest, partnering could be just that we share some of the experiences that we have, some of the good, the bad experiences that we have. You know, learn through that processes for sure. You know, we also offer, through our digital platform, opportunity, and we call it under care. You know, it's F&B Care, it's F&B Life Navigate Care platform. Within that, you can, our staff, our customers can donate money, adopt ECDs. Yeah, that's about 60 to 70 ECDs that are there that you can actually give whatever little, as much as you want. You can even donate e-bucks for that matter. But we do know that our staffers also, so the F&B staffers, FirstRand staffers, do adopt ECDs and give time. So please do get involved, and we're here to help in any way possible. And thank you for your time to listening to me.
From grassroots to greatness. Ladies and gentlemen, we transition now into our panel discussion. I'm going to invite my panelists to join me on stage. I'm going to invite first the head of social investing at FirstRand, Kone Gugushe. Let's give Kone a big round of applause as she comes up. Kone, of course, was previously the CEO of the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund and joins us in this conversation representing the FirstRand Foundation. Kone, welcome. Joining Kone is Sonja Giese. She is from DataDrive 2030. Thank you, Sonja. I see you coming up. She is founding executive director of DataDrive 2030. This is a South Africa-based social enterprise that supports the collection and use of high-quality data to improve child outcomes in the first 6 years of life. Thank you so much for being here. Joining us on stage is Kulula Manona. There's a hesitation about applause. So let's do this. Let me invite them all up, and then we can give them a massive round of applause together. Is that okay? All right, so Kulula Manona is from the Department of Basic Education. She's in the Chief Directorate that is responsible for early childhood development and reading literacy. And she comes into the space with 30 years of education experience, and she has served in several regional and international platforms. It's such a pleasure for me to also welcome Mr. Sizwe Nxasana. Thank you so much for being here. Let's give Sizwe a big round of applause as well. He is, of course, we know Sizwe for his role as CEO of the FirstRand Banking Group from 2005 through to 2015. He's also the co-founder and chairman of the South African National Education Collaboration, or NECT, also the founder and chairman of Ugusasa Student Financial Aid Program, which funds and supports students from poor and the missing middle backgrounds in South Africa. Now, can we give them all a big round of applause? Thank you so very much. So I always find it interesting to see where my panelists choose to sit when I call them up on stage. And Kone and Sizwe, you did not have to be sitting together, but we'll forgive you this one time. I do want us to run our poll first, because I think as the panelists warm up, just to get a sense of where everybody is in the room. So if we go onto our app, we'll see that there is a poll question that's already popped up there. And the question is, which of the following, do we have it up? It says, which of the following would most improve the long-term impact of corporate investments in ECD? So let's go to our virtual platform to make sure that we can vote. I'll read out the results. You can either look behind you, but I can read them out for you. We have had one person who's voted, that's why it says 100% on that one, but we're seeing a few more votes coming in. I want to give it like at least 30 seconds to see what that looks like, because fabulous. Which of the following would most improve the long-term impact of corporate investments in ECD? And we get to choose. Fabulous. See, those numbers are moving, and it's so interesting that as they move, we're not seeing a clear out one single thing, which I think is really interesting. We've got about 70, almost 80 people who have voted now. We're making our way up to 100 very quickly. But in the interim, to my panelists, what we're seeing at 30% and 30%, so the first 30% says, actually, it's shifting from short-term funding to long-term strategic investments. Another 30% says, no, actually, it's more about stronger collaboration between government, between corporates, between non-profits. Those are the two standouts. We're seeing, Sonja, a smaller number around data, and I think you'll have a view on that, about 11% saying, well, maybe it's about using data more effectively to help guide decisions and resource allocation. And the smallest amount, at just under 10%, is scaling innovative, locally relevant ECD solutions. Thank you so much for your participation. About 120 people who've taken to that. And I want us to keep these results at the back of our minds. This 30% transition from short-term funding to strategic investments, stronger collaboration. Sonja, your comments, of course, on the use of data, and we'll come back to that. So, Kone, let me start off with you, and I want to give you ample time to maybe reflect on this question, 2 to 3 minutes if you'd like. Can you describe to us FirstRand's ECD strategy as a starting point? And what are some of the programs that then flow out of that strategy? And to bring Peter back onto the stage, how do you align these programs with the business so they speak to the strategic imperatives of the business as well?
Great, thank you so much, Nxasana, and good morning, everybody. So really our strategy, I think, initially stems from the purpose of FirstRand as a group. FirstRand's purpose is to create a future of shared prosperity for a number of our stakeholders, including our employees, our customers, as well as the society that we operate in. And we do this through the different foundations that we engage with, and our FirstRand Foundation is the corporate foundation. Now, how we activate the corporate foundation, really we see ourselves as a massive ecosystem that needs to operate firstly together. So internal collaboration is very important to us. So I'm going to start with that last question of how do we tag the strategy to business. That activation of our entire ecosystem becomes very important. So the foundation works together with our segments and businesses, so our main businesses being RMB, FNB, US Bank, and so on. We work together with teams quite closely in conceptualizing items, but also activating staff members to participate through volunteer activities and so on. And, you know, the foundation has been involved in education for a very long time. And so I was glad to see that the first response is one that I think marginally got the most amount of votes, because I really do believe that we need to emphasize long-term investment. We cannot as corporates continue with just the short-term view of wanting to spend whatever we need to spend in one particular year and keep on hopping and jumping between all of these different focus areas. So FirstRand and the FirstRand Foundation has been involved in education over a very long time. And over this time, we have evolved some of the thinking that we have, because then we've been able to observe what works. We've been able to observe who are the key partners that we need to activate and work with for us to have lasting and sustainable impact. Education is one of those areas that, government is the custodian of, primarily because, government regulates, enables the framework that makes education work. However, it is important for all of our corporates to understand that we've got a role to play and therefore identify where are the entry points where we can make the most meaningful change? Where can we catalyze change? So at FirstRand, really, we're driving for systemic impact.
Yeah.
We're driving for supporting innovative solutions and really supporting focused and conscious collaboration. We as I said, use our entire ecosystem, but I think some of the things that are important for us are making sure that as we do that, we focus on people with disabilities, making sure that there's inclusion in the things that we do. We use technology to drive and amplify some of the work that we do. And then when it comes to ECD and how we have evolved our ECD strategy over time, we really have identified that the ECD practitioner or the teacher is at the center of it all. If we really want to have this entry point that gives us this amplified, sustainable change. And everything else that then comes to support that ECD practitioner, be it the infrastructure that the practitioner is operating from, be it the learners and the diversity of the learners that the ECD practitioner is working with, and of course the information that is available, the tools that are available for the teacher to really use. And we really believe that for us to be able to shift the needle on improving quality, we have to put a lot of focus and emphasis on the ECD practitioner in terms of their own capabilities, in terms of the access that they have to support structures, the networks and resources that they require. So we do a lot of work that really then focuses around ECD practitioner training, that focuses around not only how the practitioner is able to deliver on lessons and so on, but also making sure that practitioners are also adjusting to the world of today.
Sure.
So digital training becomes very important so that we are able to prepare children who can go on anywhere in the world, so that our children can be able to absorb and compete with anyone in the rest of the world. We live in an information age, so we have to help our practitioners transform themselves so that they can then also be able to be meaningful teachers for their own children. So that is overall in a nutshell our strategy.
Yeah, Kone, that's really amazing to hear. And what I'm hearing is a very intentional, very focused approach with a very clear entry point, and how that entry point then has exponential impact within a broader ecosystem. And of course, as you highlight, the shift from short-term funding to a long-term investment, which is problematic for the annual report. Because the annual report requires the picture from this year and what that looks like. And these are some of the little things that we need to almost get over in order to tell a story that shows systemic impact, as you've said. I want to then maybe jump to you, Sonja. In addition to your reflections on the poll and what you think about how we seem to have ranked the use of data a little bit low. What is your reaction to that? What does it say to us about where we value data? But more than that, you've championed data-driven approaches for quite some time, especially in early childhood development. What does a data-smart ECD ecosystem look like? And how far are we from that in South Africa?
Thanks, Nosipo. And hi, everybody. Firstly, I'm not that surprised by the poll. I'm not sure I would have voted data in that, because I think data has to be seen within the context of all of these other things. I loved your question around a data smart ecosystem, and it's a very broad topic, so I'm going to just talk to three things. The first thing that I think is essential for a data smart ecosystem is to start with a very clear mandate. It may seem counterintuitive, but a data smart ecosystem isn't data-led, it's purpose-led. It's understanding why we need to collect information, about what, for whom, and what we're going to do with that information. And if we're purpose-led, then we start to center our thinking around who needs to use the information. And it helps us to set our priorities, which I think is really important. The second thing that I think is essential for a data smart ecosystem is really the operational muscle, the kind of the mechanisms to deliver. And this is something that we've been working on for years, and it's complicated, it's time-consuming, and it requires significant investment. At DataDrive 2030, we've developed a suite of tools that help us to measure whether young children are on track. But the tools themselves are really not useful unless they're embedded within a data value chain. And I thought it was interesting that the previous panelist also spoke about a value chain.
Yeah.
This framework helps us to think about the whole data journey. From why do we collect data, the tools that we need to collect data, the infrastructure, including technology that we need to efficiently and accurately interpret, analyze the data, the communication strategies. A data smart ecosystem requires that people are able to consume data critically. So we need data literacy. We need to communicate in ways that people understand. And then we need to go beyond communication to actually thinking about what drives decision making. We consume information all the time. It doesn't necessarily get translated into the decisions that we take, and it certainly doesn't shift behavior. And so when we think about a data smart ecosystem, we're thinking about what we need to do to create that full data value chain. And then the third thing I would say is, for a data smart ecosystem, we all need to have a growth mindset. Within education space, which is where my experience sits, I think we often approach data from the perspective of looking at competency. Can this person do what we expect them to do? Or compliance. Are they doing it in the way we want them to do it? And as long as we focused on competency and compliance, I think it becomes a scary and unsafe space. And so a data smart ecosystem means that we have to approach it through a lens of curiosity and continuous learning. And I think if we can get those things right, I think we have the recipe in South Africa to be real thought leaders in the space. I've been to many conferences where I've seen country delegations presenting their data. They collect data specifically for the purpose of telling other people how well or how badly they're doing. And it's often a requirement for kind of international agencies. In South Africa, we do use data to tell our story, but I think we're more interested in using data to change our story from the ground up. And that's why I feel super excited and proud to be working in this space at this time.
Sure. Sonja, thank you so much. I was just scribbling the many sound bites that you were delivering there. I think that deserves a round of applause. We've been very conservative with our applause this morning. So, Sonja, I just want to pause on a couple of things that you've said, because as you talk about, almost a mindset transition of you away from data as a judgment tool to measure how good or how bad, but more as an invitation to curiosity, to continuous learning. What new questions should we be asking? What other pathways have we not walked and explored? I think this really becomes exciting, but I want to also tie it back to something that Kone said, because Kone started off by saying, actually, what we do is we start by aligning to the group purpose. And what you've done is you've come into this data conversation, you said it starts with a clear mandate and understanding that what we're doing is not data-led, it's purpose-led. And so there seems to be a theme about starting off with that purpose and what it is that we're trying to achieve within the ecosystem that is surfacing in this conversation. But let me then jump to Kulula and bring you this question, Kulula. If you, as sitting at the DBE, in what ways do you think that the private sector and the non-profit sector can support the department in the rollout of its ECD framework. And maybe you can just give us a high-level sort of image of what that ECD framework is all about.
Thank you, Nozipho, and I also just want to thank my two panelists here for really setting out the scene perfectly for us and for this conversation and for the question that you're asking. So, linked it to your question, and as I was listening to them delivering on their points, I was really just also scribbling away because I was picking up quite a number of multiple points of intersection with our government strategy when it comes to ECD. And to just briefly unpack it, the strategy lays out the vision for ECD for our country. And that vision, and I think it's a vision that I can boldly say, it's a vision that I think we all share, that we are looking forward to a day when every child in South Africa has access to a flexible and to an affordable and a reliable early childhood learning experience. And we are hoping that we can be able to achieve this by 2030. And to come to your question, it's very important to realize that there isn't a single sector that can be in a position to deliver on a bold mandate and a bold vision like this one of seeing that by 2030, which is really just around the corner, every child in South Africa, when we are looking at children, for instance, if we were to slice the age groups, if we are looking at children who are aged between 3 and 5, almost 1 million of those children currently do not have an access. And so, if you are sitting here today, it's a challenge to all of us. How do we really make sure that those children who are outside of this access net have access in just 5 years' time to come? So the role of private sector and the role of actually all other sectors that are non-state sector is to really join hands, and I kind of liked what Kone spoke about, because she was speaking about deliberateness when it comes to partnering. How do we become deliberate in partnerships? And how do we understand that when we are partnering, it's indeed perhaps very tempting to think about partnering along short-term goals. We can achieve this, we can tick it off, we can present it to our board, and we can really look good. But there is a lot of work, which is deep work that has to happen around systems change. And if we are to achieve this, we can't do it without setting in place the right systems. And unfortunately, systems work isn't pretty work, it isn't quick work. It doesn't turn around tomorrow. You have to do a lot of work and a lot of investment. And your investment has to be very visionary-led, because you have to understand that this is where I am journeying towards. So, what we have seen and what we've heard already from my colleagues, I'm going to build on it. I'm going to build perhaps on the entry point that Kone spoke about, because she spoke about looking within this value chain and this ecosystem of delivering quality early learning experiences to our children. She looked at one entry point, which is also an entry point that is anchored in our strategy, which is the quality of the teacher or the practitioner who leads those learning and play experiences for our children. That is part of the 5 key pillars in our strategy. Sonja spoke about the importance of ensuring that there is credible data, and she is really involved in the value chain from generation and right up to helping us with utilization of that data. It is that data that we have used, for instance, she didn't give an example, but I'll give an example about the Thrive by 5 index, and I want to thank all of you, and I want to thank you very much, because you handed to us instruments and tools that we have been able to use. We would not be having this strategy had it not been partly due to the fact that you handed us that data to be able to use to base our decisions and make our decisions, to craft these strategies going forward, because we knew what our children were sitting in terms of just the achievement of their child outcomes. We knew where they were sitting just in terms of the social and economic spectrum of their families and their communities. So we're able to craft strategies that are built on understanding the context in which they live, the context in which they learn, and the context in which they are currently not thriving.
Yeah.
And how do we get them to thrive? And so these are the pillars that have actually informed the fact that we have to ensure that we have access, or we create this access for our children. We provide, as Kone said, quality learning experiences. She spoke about ensuring that we are coordinated, and I think we saw it in the poll here, that it is important that if we're talking about collaboration between government and non-government sectors, it can't happen if it is not coordinated and coordinated well. And so when we're coordinating, we need mechanisms to coordinate that. But critical for the non-state sector is to really ensure that and hold an accountable government to putting in place a plan. Because if you do not have a plan, then how do you then coordinate and organize around? So we've put down the 2030 strategy, and we are inviting all the other sectors to join us along this journey and mobilize around this one plan. And this one plan is the 2030 strategy to early learning programs that provide our children with quality experiences.
Kulula, thank you very much. And I just want to underscore something that you've said, which I think is so important. And I thought it was good to give you the chance to really sort of outline the framework, because we've been talking about purpose, we've been talking about vision, and what I'm hearing you say is there is a plan about what needs to be done. What needs to happen now is that the various players, in the spirit of courageous collaboration and collective ownership of the ECD outcomes that we're looking for, is to actually now step into that plan. But of course, we know the plan is to go with an enabling policy and enabling space, and I'm quite certain that we're going to have that conversation. 1 million children without access to ECD today. How do we get those children and the ones that are coming after them over the next 5 years into an ECD center by 2030? And I keep thinking about 2030. It sounds so far away, but honestly, it's 4.5 years away from where we are right now. Sizwe, as I come to you, I want to reflect on the poll again. The piece on innovation, the question was scaling innovatively and locally relevant ECD solutions. I think it was about 10%. It was also fairly low. So with that in mind, knowing that you've spoken and championed transforming education through innovation and through African-led solutions, one, I'd love your reflection on that result and what does it say about how we think about innovation within the ECD space. But how do you propose we reimagine ECD in South Africa? What does the ideal state look like, and what pathway do you think could there be for us to walk towards that?
No, thank you very much, Nxasana. So, for me, there are a couple of things. I must just say that the decision to migrate the ECD function from social development to basic education was a really great decision.
Sure.
Because as a country, we started thinking about child development in a holistic sense, cognitive development and holistic development of our children, as opposed to thinking about early childhood development and education in the context of social welfare. So that's the first thing. But I do think there are many possible unintended consequences that we've got to be careful of, especially at a government institutional level. I worry a lot when I read Mr. Tech for ECD as an example, which is generated by the Department of Higher Education and Training. I don't think it takes into account the complexity that's required in dealing with the issue of practitioner professional development as an example. I think they simply took the minimum requirements for teacher education and changed a couple of things and then made it the minimum requirements for ECD practitioner education. And it creates a whole lot of problems because we know there are thousands, the data is there, which was collected with support from people like Lego and so on, of the number of practitioners that are out there that may have NQF level 4, but they're doing a really important job in the ECD space. Yes, of course it's important to professionalize ECD, but we can't treat ECD professionalization like we treat how we professionalize teachers. Because of the complexity, you've got to consider the social welfare of children, you've got to consider their cognitive development, you've got to consider the health of those practitioners, the skills that those practitioners have to look after the children as an example. And then you go to, obviously, DHET is responsible for higher education and training, including institutions, accreditation institutions such as QCTO. Now, when I look at just the Department of Higher Education and Training itself, and I'm going to sort of, because the architecture of our system is really important in supporting what we want to do on the ground. So when I look at what's going on in the Department of Higher Education and Training, as well as the universities, because we don't have teacher training colleges, as we know, we have a system of early childhood education that's been built on the partnership between the NGOs, the private sector, the Department of Social Welfare, and now the Department of Basic Education. Universities, of course, especially the likes of UNISA, Northwest University, who've created degrees, diplomas, and certificates in early childhood education. There's a risk that we face as a country that we're going to disintermediate the structure that's existed with NGOs in training practitioners. So it's really, really important that we give very careful consideration of how we're going to professionalize the practitioners in the ECD space, particularly given the fact that we have hundreds of thousands of them who are at NQF level 4, and therefore the articulation routes, whether you're following the skills programs at the QCTO or you're following the NQF as in line with the South African qualification framework, there are a lot of really careful things that are going to have to be taken into account in how we are going to move the system along as part of the professionalization. Because I think the risk taken, Mr. Tech, in ECD is that we think of it like teachers, and yet it's not like teachers, especially for the earlier years of our children, the first 1,000 days or up to 3 years old. And of course, the country is now introducing grade R and streamlining grade R, and we're talking about then bringing grade RR, in other words, H4s and so on. So I'm just saying it's going to require the higher education system that's responsible for accreditation bodies in this country, working with Department of Basic Education, plus a lot of the other stakeholders in the ECD space to make sure that we don't collapse what has worked. It is important to fix those things that haven't worked. So that's really my issue. And when I talk about technology in this context, I think we have a wonderful opportunity in this journey of professionalization of ECD practitioners, not using fancy platforms, but using accessible platforms. A lot of the, I have a preschool on our farm in Ikopo, Kwagnagban, the southern KZN. The practitioners there, they use WhatsApp, they use accessible tools. So often we sit in Joburg and we think about, very complicated IT platforms that you can use. And there are a lot of people, education technology companies that are developing and selling really fancy tools out there. But I'm just saying the majority of ECD practitioners are gogos, young women who are running ECD practitioners in garages, in back rooms, at homes, in the townships and villages. And we've got to think about solutions that are appropriate for them to support the children.
Sizwe, thank you so much. And I've been watching Kulula from the corner of my eye as you speak. She's taken ferocious notes as you were speaking. So I'm going to give her an opportunity to respond in a moment. But I think you raised such an important issue, and that is, even when the plan has been shared, the courage to step in and engage with the plan, to be able to hold up mirrors and feedback to say, well, maybe in this instance, we haven't thought fully, comprehensively about this particular aspect of the plan. And as you highlight the distinctiveness of the ECD practitioner, I'm quite sure that Kulula will have some thoughts about how they've thought about that. But I think you bring a great provocation into the conversation. Let's also not collapse what has worked before. I think it's been an important soundbite that you've given us. While Kulula chews on that, Kone, I want to just jump back to something else, because I'm still stuck on that poll result. How do we then do the job of transitioning to long-term investment when you go to the board and say, I'm not interested in this financial year, I'm wanting to present a 5-10-year investment plan? How does that conversation land, and what do you think needs to be true for boards to see the investment potential and not just the short-term funding potential?
So, Nxasana, I think, South Africa is unfortunately a poster child for a number of problematic statistics or realities. One that was mentioned here today by our earlier speaker is the fact that our kids are unable to read for meaning by grade 4.
Sure.
And this is something that needs to leave us stirred.
Yeah.
Because it cannot be that we accept that, year after year, when our children are tested against global standards and against global peers, they always come out at the bottom. And it seems like, as a country, we tend to almost accept and wallow in some of the challenges that we have. We call them stubborn, as if there is nothing that we can do about them. And so for me, the case for long-term investment really becomes made by some of those, for us to really shift the needle for a grade 4 to read for meaning, means that even if I understand that I have older children that no longer need to learn how to read, but the importance of making sure that a child who is born today is going to go into a system that enables them to reach certain cognitive developmental milestones that will support their ability to perform at an acceptable standard that gets us to be competitive. And that is not going to be a 12-month program that we fund and then we move on to the next best thing. And I think boards understand this. I think businesses plan long-term for their own sustainability. And so when we come to the development space, it does not change. And so when we engage with our boards and when we want to have things that are reflected in our annual reports, it doesn't have to be the freshest thing that we are doing, but we need to adopt this consistency that says we've got these long-term plans that say, and this is why data is so important, understanding where we are we moving from, and therefore what is the trajectory that we need to assume to get us to a point where we need to be. Set targets so that you can be able to measure your progress as you move along that trajectory.
So we've got to move from the freshest and the sexiest towards the hardest. That's my sound bite for the day. I just think you've just put that so well in terms of not accepting that certain things are just stubborn and calling them stubborn challenges, but really coalescing together to figure out what needs to be true for this to be solved, and it is the long-term investment strategy that you're highlighting. But you start off with data, Kone, and that's why I'm going to come back to Sonja on this, because even in that statement, you start off with data that helps us understand where we are and where we need to get to. Sonja, how do we make sure that data is not just informative, but it actually drives action? And that the systemic change that Kulula talks about, that the data actually drives us there. So we're not just using the data to tell a story in a narrative-based functionality, but actually using the data to make the requisite changes.
I mean, I think it builds a lot on what my colleagues have said. You really have to have a deep understanding of the context. The tools and the systems have to be fit for purpose.
Sure.
So I think that's really important. Earlier I spoke about our data value chain, and for us that's absolutely essential to ensuring that data drives change. I've seen too many great studies where the goal is a peer review publication, and that really doesn't end up driving a lot of change. So that's important. So we talk about the idea of democratizing data. So taking data out of the sort of enclave of academia and saying, how do we actually put it in the hands of people who were closest to children? And we found that that's how we really make data actionable. And to support that, you know, we help people, for example, to set intentions before they collect data. We develop how-to guides, insights briefs. We develop tools to help people with creative problem solving. These are all mechanisms that are needed to make data actionable. But I'd be very remiss not to talk about resources, especially to this room. So I think just want to spend a minute on the issue of resourcing, and particular what was commented around multi-year budgets.
Yes.
So if you really want to support data-driven change, you can imagine that you need to support the whole journey from thinking through why are we collecting data. You need to give funding for the actual data collection process and producing communications, and that's often where people end, right? Funders will fund it because they want to know, is their investment making a difference, right? So they put the funding in, they get a report. If you want that report to actually drive change, you have to keep funding it. You have to think about funding the whole learning cycle. So how do you then support those organizations to learn from that data and to make the changes they need to make? And even if the results are positive, there are always areas for improvement, and one wants to sustain positivity. So you want to understand what's driving the good outcome so that we can keep doing more of that. So my invitation really is to not see the kind of results as the end of the process, but really just 25% of the way through the process. And this requires longer term thinking, multi-year budgets, but probably even, well, as importantly, it requires flexible funding. So if you fund an organization to run workshops, for example, to upskill their practitioners in early numeracy, and then you get the results and you see that actually the practitioners, the children, are really struggling with fine motor coordination. And what they need is coaching and mentorship. Does your funding and your contracting allow for flexibility so that those organizations can course correct, can pivot what they do? And that goes down to having systems that are fit for purpose. Are your contracting systems, your grant agreements, your financial decision-making processes, are your boards flexible enough to really allow for data-informed decision-making? And then you ask whether data has led to change, and I'd say an emphatic yes. Kulula mentioned the Thrive by 5 index, so that's a national population level survey. It's been used to motivate for greater financing. It's been used to help decision making by philanthropists and government, business, set benchmarks, so absolutely. Research, our tools have been used. One of the things I love best is this work that looks at positive deviance. So we are so used to hearing bad news, and what we found when we looked at our data were these children from very low income communities who are performing exceptionally well, on par with the best, the richest of their peers. So we did a deep dive to understand why that is, and we learned a whole lot of things about the characteristics of early learning programs operating in resource-constrained contexts that produce these exceptional results, and that is now driving action. And then, really excitingly for us, our tools are used by organizations that work on the ground. They may have 1 preschool or 100 preschools or 1,000 preschools. And the data that they collect gives them some sense of the strengths and weaknesses of their programs. And using that, we've seen within a period of 8 to 10 months, we've seen those programs shift practices and shift outcomes with significant results. And I think that just tells us that actually data can drive change. And the amazing thing about working in the ECD space, there are very few things you can fix in 4 years.
Sure.
But 4 years for a 4-year-old child is their entire life. So if you can change the way we treat the children who are born today for the next 4 years, those outcomes will be dramatically different.
Sure. Thank you so much, Sonja. I think one of the things that stay with me as you share that response is this idea that the value chain is longer than the report that you're looking for. And so, are you going to put the resources behind the longer process that's required, or just up until what you need to get out of the value chain? I think you make such a powerful argument as well for the impact that data has already had. I had this as a thought at the back of my mind as you were speaking about the flexibility that's required in funding, and to maybe borrow from the venture capitalist industries. VCs are now building their funding models with failure anticipated and expected, because when you fail, you actually get up and get better. And so imagine if we're funding with an expectation of a pivot, of a learning, because the data shows us what we need to be focusing on, and that would be absolutely incredible. So I have a question for you, Kulula, but I don't want to ask my question. I want your notes. I want to know that furious writing that was happening as Sizwe was speaking. What are some of the comments you have for that? And then I want to just take a couple of questions that have come through on the virtual platform. Just your thoughts as we think about this really healthy tension and engagement that comes with looking at the ECD framework and saying, from a practitioner perspective, how do we make sure that our practitioners are fit for the job and are fully supported in the right way, in a way that speaks to their needs?
Okay. And so I think it was an appreciation, that ferocity.
I'm being intentionally provocative to get you up.
That ferocity was really just about the appreciation of what Sizwe was reminding us about.
Yes.
He was reminding us about something that I think we should always remember, that this sector was built on the shoulders, or it stands rather on the shoulders of many women, the go-go's that he was making reference to.
Yes.
And I think what that said to me was that our approach to ECD has to embrace a lot of humility.
Yes.
We inherited, as the Department of Basic Education, and we're always open about this, we inherited a sector that has been a going concern. What we've done over the 2 years since we received the function, I want to say it's nothing compared to what has been built over the years and really handed over to us with that great humility. So it's those NGOs and those NPOs and those funders that came up first to say that we see that we have children in South Africa that are going to be our future, that are going to be our next leaders, that really need to be given the right opportunities to learn and to play. Having said that, coming to his point that he was making, which was also just a caution, that's how I read it, in terms of policy making and thinking about the consequences of policy making if policy perhaps doesn't take into account context and it isn't going to be the driving force that we need for systemic and long-lasting change. But I also just want to set his heart at ease, and perhaps all of us in the room, in saying that as much as the minimum requirements for early childhood and education, which is the Mr. ECCE that he was referring to, has been crafted in the manner in which it has been crafted, DHED has appreciated the need, and I think that's how we should always approach policy, that it's not a writing on the stone. Policy has to evolve, it has to be tested against implementation, tested against its responsiveness to addressing the challenges on the ground. And so there's openness to really addressing the gaps that are in the policy as it stands. But in taking that conversation forward, the Department of Basic Education, having appreciated the very same gaps, the minister set up a task team that has participation cross-sectorally. Actually, when I'm talking about that cross-sectoral participation, I'm going to place more emphasis particularly on those organizations, whether they are the organizations that we call resource and training organizations, universities, higher education, as well as our entities like your QCTO, your SAQA, your ETDP-SETA. So there is that participation in that task team, and that task team is called the Human Resource Development Plan for ECCE. So it has been set up again, particularly because of all of these gaps that we have, and also with a vision of the kind of a professionalized practitioner that we all would want to see. And if I can just take you back to the strategy to just see how important the practitioners or the teachers have actually been placed even in the strategy. Our strategy has 5 pillars. It has access as one pillar, followed by quality. And within quality, practitioners are firmly embedded in that pillar of quality. And then the third pillar is the pillar of resourcing. Again, they are equally embedded in resourcing. And then there is a specific pillar that looks at their professionalization. And we know that we inherited a sector where there are serious challenges when it comes to just their professionalization, issues around their remuneration, conditions of service, the lack of wage, just something as that we can take for granted as just wage security. So we are painfully aware of the challenges that really militate against getting our practitioners to be where we would want to be as a country, and us as the department particularly, who have been granted that constitutional responsibility to really lead that meaningful change, and the last one then being coordination. So you can see that they really are embedded in the entire strategy, in understanding of the fact that if you were to look at the many ingredients that will give us the child who thrives by 5, and if the child thrives by 5, then they can thrive by 10 and read for meaning and count for meaning by 10, and they can become the kind of citizens who can make meaningful contribution in society. But if you look at what in that array of ingredients that give us that, it is the teacher who is at the center of that. But I'm going to say something that is important.
I'm
just
going to give you 10 more seconds
because
because I want to take some audience questions before we close.
It's important to understand that there is underlying and basal work that we need to do, and that work is the environment in which these practitioners operate. They operate in early learning programs that we know are not registered. So it is important that we understand that if we work together towards supporting government's mass registration drive, that is the first door that is going to unlock quality and a quality environment for our practitioners, because once they are registered, they stand a chance to get subsidization from government. It is from that subsidy that they are actually even getting paid. So thank you very much to all of the organizations that are part of the Banapili mass registration drive. It's a really first master key that unlocks a whole lot of other doors, including that professionalization of the workforce.
Kulula, thank you so much. And I think I just want to read Ronald's comment because it speaks to the backlog that you've just touched on? Because Ronald is saying, what is the current plan or thinking to address the growing backlog in getting ECD centers registered and compliant, especially in under-resourced communities? So thank you for touching on that, because I think to Ronald's point, it is another area that we've got to focus on, and you've touched on it, and I think, Ronald, perhaps an opportunity to engage with Kulula over lunch on that. I want to just bring a very quick question to you, Sizwe, that's come from the floor. From Beverly, and I think Kulula has also just touched on this when she spoke about the wage and acknowledging the wage issue in the sector. Beverly is saying, how do we align the push for professionalism and the qualification of practitioners within the ECD sector with the earning potential of the sector? So how could we be thinking about that in a way that would really make the sector attractive for practitioners as they come in? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I do think, we've got to recognize the amount of resources that are coming from a lot of different stakeholders, NGOs, CSI programs, and so on, into the ECD space. But if I had the magic wand, which I don't have, there are a number of things that would actually drive, the answer to that question. One is, I think we, as part of taking ECD seriously in the country, one of the things that I would do as an example, I mean, even at the level of the DBE, for that matter, I think ECD as a directorate needs to be at the level of the DDG. I'm not trying to promote you, Kulula. I just think it's so important that it's got to have the status that it requires.
Yeah.
And the same applies to DHET, by the way, because it's somewhere buried, somewhere in DHET. The key focus is on the university branch and the TVET branch and the community, colleges branch. I think that's really important, because I think as we think about the wage for the ECD practitioners, there are a number of examples. If you just take, for instance, the Presidential Youth Employment Initiative that employed more than 350,000 young people into the basic education system in the schools. I think there's a lot that can be done in mobilizing resources for ECD practitioners and young people. Think about employment creation potential of ECD in the country. It's massive, actually. If we organized it properly, we didn't kill those things at work, but we supported that sector with structures around appropriate professionalization. One of the things that I think I would do as an example, I think, organizing the professional development of ECD practitioners, especially all the way up to NQF level 9, if you like. In a way, I don't think killing teacher training colleges had all the good intentions that it was intended. I think there's a huge opportunity for us as a country to create appropriate professional development institutions for ECD that are not necessarily in universities. I really think that would be something that's important, because bring them closer to the communities. So I would take the community branch of DHET, create that closer to communities to train ECD practitioners. I would do a whole lot of other things. But I do think that, just organizing the supply and demand, in other words, the training of practitioners closer to the communities, the articulation routes that are not necessarily based on the current framework. And I'm really pleased that Kulula is saying there's a cross-functional institutional task team now that's looking at the issue, because the current framework, it really is problematic. So there's a lot that can be done there to really make sure that we are not just professionalizing ECD practitioners, but we bring them close to the communities. We're paying those people appropriately, using some of the approaches that have been proven, as I was saying, the Presidential Youth Employment Initiative was a really important one. I wish it was institutionalized. It wasn't just a temporary thing.
Yeah.
And we can do the same in the ECD space.
So thank you so very much. And I'm running out of time, but I have to squeeze this in. And then I want to borrow Sizwe's magic wand. I'm going to give you all a wand because I'm going to ask you one final question on the back of your magic wand. But I want to squeeze this question to you, Kone. It's from the chat and it's come up a couple of times. Nwabisa says, what about parents? She says, parents have a huge role to play in the early development of children. How do we include and equip parents? And I think we've spent a lot of time speaking about the practitioner that you've identified as a central entry point. Do we extend that thinking into the family and the household and parents?
Parents, of course, super important in the development of children lifelong.
Yeah.
And the importance of the practitioner is that the practitioner then activates all the different actors that support the learning of a child.
Yes.
Whether it is the infrastructure that is required, the learning resources that are required, the parental support, engagement, involvement that is required. For example, I think a lot of times it would be the learning practitioner that identifies certain learning challenges that a child experiences because of not only the amount of time that they spend with the child, but the type of time that they spend with the child. And an equipped practitioner will be able to reach out appropriately to the parent, arrange supportive structures to help with the learning journey of a child. So when we say that we've identified the practitioner as the lever that enables that multiplier effect, that enables that systemic impact, is because the practitioner becomes at the center of activating all the other players that are required.
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic response. There's quite a lot of conversation on the conference app around the role of the child, of the parent, the family, access to social services, and so on. As we close, magic wand in each of your hands. With this magic wand, you get to prioritize one action that companies, nonprofits can take to support the ECD space. I'm going to start off with Sonja. I'm going to work my way this way. Sizwe, you only get one use of the magic wand. I heard you pulling out a number of things at that last one. And then Kone, you get to take us home. But Sonja, if you could wave your magic wand, yes, and just ask for one thing, what would that be?
Well, I'm going to change tack slightly. So I think we tend to think about businesses as contributing finances, CSI. I think there's a real missed opportunity to actually leverage other aspects of business: infrastructure, communications platforms, transport networks, intranets. There's just so much opportunity for us to leverage much more of what business has to offer. The same things, those assets that you've built up that help you to grow your business, are the same things we need to grow the ECD sector. And I think that we could leverage value that exceeds the cash investment that business is making.
Thank you so much, Sonja. I think that deserves a round of applause for sure. How do we better leverage and optimize our ask of business so that it's not just about the money, but it's funding plus, is what I'm hearing you say. Kulula, if you had a magic wand that you could wave and have one thing that you think we could prioritize and help us get those 1 million children in ECD centers by 2030 and the many others that will come after them, what would that be?
That would be to ask the entire ecosystem to mobilize behind the one plan to get those 1 million children have access to early learning programs that are providing quality. And just to say that it is when we work together that we can really see maximized impact. And it is that impact that I think with the Banapili mass registration, we are saying to South Africans, here is the plan, let's all fall behind that plan. With that plan, we can be able to provide those multiple pathways to qualifications that Sizwe was talking about. We can be able to support those grassroots organizations, those gogos, those mamas that are really at the backbone of our early learning programs.
Fantastic. Let's mobilize around the one plan and all pull in the same direction. Kulula, thank you so much. Sizwe, one wave of the wand. What is the thing that you believe, if we prioritize, would really shift the needle for the ECD sector?
Yeah, so, I think it's captured in what Kulula was saying.
Yes.
Access, equity, and quality. I mean, for me, those elements and figuring how we do them closer to the communities, closer to where these children are, I think will help achieve a lot. Because when I read, and I've read a lot of the provincial education departments' strategic plans up to 2030, I've read all 9 of them. All of them talk about the registration drive, but very little about what they're going to do in the communities around them.
Yeah.
And provincial and local government plays a really, really important role here.
Sure. Well articulated. I did note that it wasn't one thing, Sizwe, but it's fine. We'll go with it. Access, equity, and quality are 3 things, but that's fine. But you raise an important provocation for us that I don't want us to lose. Post-registration, then what? So that's a very important question that we've got to be asking ourselves. What are the tentacles that root us in the community? What are those pathways that embed these centers so that they are serving the community? So Kone, you get to take us home as you talk about the one action that you would prioritize for the sector.
So in talking about that, I'll take a little bit of a detour and just take you on a journey. I attended a preschool called Ekonwabeni, which means a place of happiness. And it was led by a lady called Memtena, and there was another teacher called Miss Nondombi, who really, I'm not going to divulge my age, but I am a bit advanced in the age, But they left such a great impression for me that allowed me and ignited me to want to learn, to have curiosity and a confidence to approach the learning journey, despite whatever challenges there may have been. And they were, important members of the community that we would see, whether it is at church or at any other community engagements, plugged in to the lives that we as the children that went into that early learning center were doing. Now, the reason I mention this is I go back to the importance of the early learning practitioner, that if you activate them enough and appropriately, and I'm giving them names that resonate with me, because we all have them in our communities. How do we enable our early learning practitioners to be the people that will catalyze the learning curiosity and the journey that will put our children on a path for success and prosperity? So how do we create more Memtenas, more Miss Nondombis in the work that we do? And they will serve as the foundation that really supports our ECD sector.
Beautifully put. The catalysts themselves need support and activation. Let's give a big round of applause to Kone as well. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm standing between you and lunch. So I'm going to ask you just to give my panelists a round of applause, and then I'm going to give you 1 or 2 announcements.